Hello, I'm Jodie Rizzo-O'Brien, part of the AWI Extension South Australia team. In this 10-minute talk, we're going to hear from Ken Solly about what is the cost of underfeeding ewes. Thanks, Ken.
In this webinar, we're going to look at sheep feeding in a different way. Anytime that we spend money on a farm, we're quite often using a comparison. Like if you're going to go and buy a new tractor or something like that, you have an awareness of what the existing tractor is costing you to run, what the repairs are, and what it's like, the lifespan that tractor can be. And then you can start to do some sums against the new tractor. Well, having run a heap of dry time workshops across South Australia in recent weeks, I've found that a lot of producers are actually underfeeding their sheep. So I thought it was a useful exercise to look at what is it really costing us to not feed the sheep. We can work out rations and do the costing on those rations and get a total outlay for purchasing extra feed. But what are the costs of not feeding correctly? So this is a comparison I did for 1,000 composite ewes. Now, merino breeders, just don't feel as though you've been left out, but just follow the concept and the process behind my thinking here. So if we have a 1,000 composite ewes, if you've got the reason I do it on 1,000, if you've got 500, you just cut the figures in half. If you've got 2,000, you just double them up. So you should be able to glean something out of it. So in a normal year, on this particular operation, you might have 2% ewe deaths. Your lambing percentage at marking for a composite might be 160, which is really good, but it might be off the back of a 185 scan. Your wool production might be 4.5 kilograms of crossbred wool, and your lamb carcass weight's 22 kilos. And your normal marking numbers is around 1,550 lambs, and you keep about 300 of those as replacements. So the number of sale lambs you got is about 1,250 lambs. So in a poor year, if we don't feed the sheep properly, and this year where you got absolutely no paddock feed, a lot of you, the chances are you'd be underfeeding to the point that it may affect your performance, as I've got shown here. Your ewe deaths might have gone from 2 to 5%, so there's 50 ewe deaths. Your lambing percentage dropped down by 10%. Your wool production down 10%, but that's not a huge financial impact in a crossbred wool operation, but it still needs to be considered. Your carcass weight might be a couple of kilos less. I reckon in a lot of situations it might be more than that. But the number of lambs at weaning, marking, 1,400 in that case are down, and then you have to keep more ewe lamb replacements to replace the extra deaths that have taken place. And so therefore your number of sale lambs drops down to 1,100. So if we then put a dollar value on those, I've put $150 on the per ewe for the extra ewes that have died. So there's $4,500. Then you've got your wool production down 10%, which is only less than half a kilo, but it's about $900 on 1,000 ewes. Your reduction in sale lambs, you're down 10%, so you've 150 lambs less sale lambs, so I'll put them at $125 a lamb. There's nearly 19,000, and your ewe lambs retained to cover ewe deaths, again 125 as an average, 3,750 there. Now the extra ewes that fail to conceive for next year, I suspect underfed ewes, they're still going to strip a heap of condition score. And this year you'll find it'll be quite easy for a ewe to lose one condition score during lambing, particularly the twin ewes. So you've got a loss there forthcoming next year. And then if you've got lambs that are 2 kilogram carcass weight down on a $6.50 kilogram carcass price, then there's $13 a lamb. So therefore, we've got $14,300 of less lamb income there. So you can see that you've got 48,000. Now, that may not be your figure, but just follow the process and you might be able to do your own figures. So in some cases, it might be 40,000, but in other cases, it might be over 50. So as we move to the second screen, we can then start to look at, we've got two costs here. We've got the cost of buying extra feed, and then we've got the cost if we don't feed them adequately. I've just been through not feeding them adequately. So that 48,000, if you had to buy barley at $360 a tonne, that's 135 tonnes of additional grain that you could buy for that amount of dollars. So on the 1,000 ewes, if you were to feed them 12 megajoules, which I reckon is the absolute max you could feed per day of barley, you've got the equivalent of 4 months of feed there to try and emulate your normal production. So when we work it out on a cost per megajoule basis, barley being about 12.5 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter, but when we go to feed out, we're feeding out a kilogram of barley, but it's at 90% dry matter. In other words, it's got 10% water. So that means we're feeding out 900 grams every time we feed out a kilogram. So that brings the megajoules as fed down to 11.3. And if we divide that into our, to get our cost per megajoule, well, the simplest way is to look at 12.5 megs per kilogram dry matter. And you see in the line before it, it's costing you 40 cents a megajoule per kilogram of dry matter. So divide one into the other, and you get 3.2 cents a megajoule. So the bottom is a what if scenario. So at 3.2 cents per megajoule, I've done 30, 60, 90, and 120 day period, feeding at 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 megajoules down the vertical. So you can see how much per ewe for each of those periods. Now, I would think that most people could, with their existing feed, by adding on a certain amount, there may well be 60 days, probably for a lot of people at a minimum, even though you might have had some rain and there's a little bit poking through. The sheep will be that hungry, they'll be nipping it off, and that's the benefit of containment feeding, is that we get them off the paddocks and allow them to get onto their secondary leaves and get that photosensitization happening, so we get good quick growth. So my guess is most people would be spending, could be spending an additional $15 to $20 on feed, and you think, golly, that's on top of what I'm already doing. But you've already seen what it costs if you don't. So if we were to spend $15 on the 1,000 ewes, then there's 15,000. It'll take us back closer to what a normal performance will be, but possibly not quite. So if we spend $15,000, there's a huge difference between that and 48,000. If we look at a good case scenario, in the fact that if we got really good rain immediately, the chances are you might only have to feed for another 30 days. But in general, that ewes with lambs on them would need 12 megajoules or more. So you can see there with the red circle around, that's $11.50 per ewe to feed them for a month, which sounds enormous, which it is, but the circumstances demand that if you want to get production out the other end. Remember, the ewes are looking after you by creating income and profit. So it's really important that you look after them. Whereas if we don't get that rain, we could go out to, say, another 120 days, which would take us into spring, where we might be spending $30. And the beauty of thinking out that far is you can say, well, I know that that's what it's cost, that amount of risk and my circumstance where I'm at. Like if you're already lambed and you're 2 months in and you can see the lambs are doing it a bit tough, and you might say, well, I'm not going to go there because I know it's going to cost me $30 a ewe to feed. Admittedly, you'd probably be weaned well before that date. But yeah, you're dropping it back to 8 megajoules. That's the amount of feed a dry 60 kilo or 50 kilo dry sheep requires to maintain itself. So most of the ewes around the traps are higher than that. They're 60 plus. So they'd need at least 8. So you've got an idea. They're at $31 spread over 4 months at 8 megajoules. Just gives you an insider. So the beauty of doing that what if is you've got different time periods and different megajoule being fed, and you've got a cost as a result. So you're armed with some useful data on which to make a decision. Come back to my original premise is that anytime you're making a decision, there's always 2 options, or you should always have 2 options. You do your costing on both, and then you make your judgment call there. Just to have one quote on a new tractor or one quote on building a new house doesn't give you much to base lever from. You need the second option to be able to make a sound decision. The other things, there's other losses that we can have in the system. If you haven't lambed yet and you're underfeeding in that last third of pregnancy, the chances are that you're actually reducing the future fleece weight of those progeny, and also increasing the fibre diameter. So when you lose one condition score in the last third of pregnancy, which is a rarity, I know, but you reduce fleece weight by about 0.4 of a kilogram for every year of that progeny's life going forward. So there's a lot of smaller costs that still need to be considered or thought about as additional criteria on which you make a decision. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of a framework to be able to do a bit of a calculation for yourself. And this year you'll be spending a heck of a lot more on feed, and basically because we've got nothing in the paddock. If you've got dry feed there, I want you to forget it's there, because the value of dry feed when it gets to this time of the year is nigh on useless. So don't be trapped into thinking they've got a lot of feed there, because they don't. Chances are they're only getting probably about 1 megajoule out of it, and they're probably expending, could be 2 megajoules walking the paddock trying to get it. So it's a bit of a false economy dry feed, I think, at this time of the year.
Thank you, Ken, for sharing your experience and professional knowledge with us on what is the cost of underfeeding ewes. Certainly some food for thought. Don't forget there are resources and help available. Please check out the AWI Extension South Australia website. This 10-minute talk was made possible by funding from Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, and the Department of Primary Industries and Regions.